Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris Blue Ribbon, at the helm this evening. I want to give a shout-out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We are 100% listener-supported, so if you like what you're listening to, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support, and thank you for any contribution you can make to this wonderful station. I want to thank my producer and mad painter, a.k.a. Thomas Becker, tonight for assisting with this special event called Celebrating Samhain with Selena Fox. Celebrating Samhain with Selena Fox is about exploring old and new ways to celebrate Samhain. Selena shares ways of connecting with ancestors, honoring beloved dead, celebrating the Celtic New Year, and doing magic for equal rights of witches, druids, and other pagans. Her bio is a nature priestess, pagan rights activist, writer, psychotherapist, green cemetery director, and forest witch. Her writings on celebrating the seasons, ancestors, nature magic, and other topics have been widely published online and in print. She travels internationally presenting workshops and rituals, and also does teaching through her weekly internet radio show. Selena is founder of Circle Sanctuary, which has been serving pagans worldwide since 1974, and also is executive director of Pagan Spirit Gathering, a national global summer solstice festival. Her websites are www.selenafox.com and www.circlesanctuary.org. It's a pleasure to have her on tonight, and welcome, Selena, to the show.
Great to be here, and happy Samhain.
Happy Samhain. Merry meet. It's exciting to meet you, that's for sure. And I want to also thank you for being a pagan rights activist and supporting our brothers and sisters. Excuse me. I really wanted to thank you for that and for being out there in support of our spiritual family.
And I am very grateful for you and everybody else that has helped us over the years with the pagan rights work that we do.
That's awesome. And can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yes. The Lady Liberty League was founded in 1985. It is a pagan civil rights network that's operated by Circle Sanctuary. And it began in 1985 in response to a piece of federal legislation which was in danger of becoming law in the U.S. There was an amendment to a postal appropriations bill that would have taken away tax-exempt status from Wiccan churches, in essence, having the Wiccan religion and other forms of paganism that are related as second-class religions. Not only was it unconstitutional, but it would have been a big setback for the quest for liberty, justice, and equality for all in this country, not just for pagans, but for people of many different paths. But before the age of internet being widespread, thousands of people from many different forms of the craft and other forms of paganism from other religions and philosophies heard about this problematic legislation, which had been unanimously passed by the U.S. Senate, and managed to make their voices heard. And the final version of the bill, which did become law, no longer had this amendment on it. It was the first time that federal legislation against the craft had been introduced on Capitol Hill, and fortunately, it was defeated.
Excellent. That's wonderful. I really applaud you for that.
And it was at Samhain time. It was passed in late September of 1985, and within one moon's time, it went to defeat and was voted down just before Samhain of that year, and a number of national media sources carried the story. So that was a good Samhain victory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what a way to start the new year, huh?
That's right.
That's awesome. I'm really, really pleased to hear that. And for those of our listeners who don't have a real understanding of Wicca, can you go through a rundown as far as what Wicca is and where it originated from?
Yeah. So Wicca, or the Wiccan religion, is a contemporary form of nature religion that has its roots in the Celtic past. There are a variety of different forms of Wicca. There's Gardnerian and Alexandrian, there's shamanic, there's fairy, and a variety of other types of the Wiccan religion. What we have in common is honoring nature as central to spiritual practice, honoring the divine and the form of a great goddess. And most forms of the Wiccan religion recognizes the divine not only as a great unity, the interconnected force of all things, but honors the divine in the form of female divinities or goddesses and male divinities or gods. And some also have a variety of different nature spirits that are important to work with as part of spiritual practice. There's an honoring of the divine within ourselves as humans, within plants and animals, within the elements of nature: earth, air, fire, water, spirit, the fifth element. That's that inner penetrating spiritual force that connects us all together. Some say that the Wiccan religion is very old because of its ancient roots. Some say it's very new and originated in the UK in the mid-20th century. And then a number of people, including myself, actually acknowledge the roots from the past as well as from the more recent past and recognize that the Wiccan religion is old and contemporary both. In addition to the Wiccan religion, there are some other forms of contemporary paganism that have some things in common: celebrating the cycles of the season, the cycles of the moon, and cycles of life: birth, death, hand fasting or wedding, coming of age into adulthood, coming of age into seniorhood, are just some of the life cycle passage rites that not only are part of the Wiccan religion in all of its forms, but part of other forms of paganism. Paganism has its roots also in the ancient past from a number of different ancient civilizations and cultures. Just as contemporary Christianity has Protestant Christianity and Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and then a big category of lots of other types of Christianity, you're going to have major branches within paganism as well. You have the Wiccan religion as one large type of paganism. You have Druidism, which also has its roots in the Celtic past. Heathenism, sometimes known as Asatru or the Northern Way, which is rooted in Germany and Scandinavia. And then you have a large grouping of a variety of different types of pagan religion, including those that are rooted in a particular place or people, such as reconstructed Greek religion, ancient Roman religion, religion from the Baltics in Europe, and the Egyptian religion, Kemetic religion. In fact, there's some forms of paganism that actually blend some other world religions with pagan religion, such as Christo-paganism, which combines pagan paths with forms of Christianity.
It's incredible. It's one beautiful religion and so extensive in so many different areas and very ancient, in my opinion. And I really appreciate your definition. It's a beautiful way to describe what it is. And I'd also...
Well, yeah, and it's been around for many, many generations. I mean, if you look at paganism and the even bigger category of nature religion, that's the first religion that humankind had.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You know, going back to the Stone Age. And how do we know that? Well, there are rock carvings and rock paintings and some of the archaeological sites that have discovered burials, and we know natural burial was done back by the people who lived during the not only Paleolithic but in times since. And the use of sacred art to connect with the natural world is something that's been going on for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And what is a nature priestess?
I call myself a nature priestess at times because it reflects the much larger community of people I serve. I not only work with people from different pagan paths, but I also work with the emerging form of spirituality known as eco-spirituality or green spirituality. Some people might not choose to use the word pagan or Wiccan, Druid, heathen, witch, pantheist for themselves, but they are very attuned to nature as part of their worldview, philosophy, and spirituality. When I travel around the country, sometimes I'm doing services that have a nature religion orientation, but it's more of an interreligious, multicultural expression where there are people from many different beliefs and different ethnicities and walks of life. So in my nature priestess role in doing a funeral or a wedding or a baby blessing or some other rite of passage, I see that through my service I'm helping people connect with the divine through nature.
That's wonderful. That's great service that you're doing to this world. Really, really appreciate you. He's just a wonderful being. By the way, I love your smiling face whenever I see pictures of you on Facebook, too. You have a beautiful energy about you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you just radiate that beautiful, beautiful goddess energy. So I just wanted to, bring that up real quick. I was also going to ask you about the Green Cemetery Director position you have in Forest Witch. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yes, I operate Circle Cemetery. Circle Cemetery is located at Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve, which is a 200-acre sacred nature sanctuary near Madison, Wisconsin. And Circle Sanctuary, the nonprofit organization, we are a legally recognized church, owns the land and operates the cemetery. I'm the cemetery director. We started Circle Cemetery in 1995, and in so doing, we became one of the first green cemeteries in the U.S. A green cemetery takes ancient burial practices and combines them with intentional preservation of green space. We not only inter and scatter human cremains at our cemetery. When we bury them, many people choose to have a marker. We have a stone marker made of granite, typically, that we have to mark the various cremains interment sites. But we also do full body burials. And that old practice involves not embalming the body and putting the body in a biodegradable container. It might be a linen shroud or a wicker basket, a pine box, a cremation coffin made of biodegradable cardboard. There are a number of different options. But the idea is that you return the human body to the earth where it decomposes as well as the container it's in. So you're not embalming the body, you're not lining the grave with fiberglass or cement, you're not putting in a steel casket designed to last for hundreds of years. No, you're doing a simple natural burial, and the intention is to let the human remains return to the environment in a good way.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I wish everybody would do that. That's awesome. And
it's something that pagans did in the ancient past, and that are continuing to do in different parts of the world. In the United States, green burial is starting to be seen as an option once again. The embalming came in back during the Civil War, when so many people were killed in that conflict, that there needed to be a way to get the bodies back to their loved ones in their home areas, and that's how embalming really started to become widespread in the United States. So it actually is a pretty recent practice when you look at the entire history of humankind living in North America. Native Americans were doing natural burial for hundreds and thousands of years before European contact. Part of what we are endeavoring to do is have both options of natural burial as well as cremains, interment, and scattering for our cemetery, not only in the near future, but we have 200 acres for a nature preserve, and our cemetery part is 20 acres. We really are projecting way off into the future, and am working to not only develop our cemetery for future generations as well as existing ones, but to be a resource for people who want to start green cemeteries in other parts of the U.S. and other parts of the world.
That's fabulous. That's wonderful. Yeah, I just applaud you for that. And, yeah, that's the way to go, and no pun intended. But insofar as the witch's transition goes and the rebirth and transition when they transfer out, can you go through the stages of your preparation for that, what you would do with a witch or pagan, and how the process is?
Yeah, I actually have a workshop that I call Pagan Death Passages, and have done some teaching about that, not only for people that want to do their own planning, which I think everyone would be wise to do, give some thought about that, and Samhain is a really good time to do that. It's a time where we pay our respects for our beloved dead and our ancestors. And it's a time to really look at that threshold of that connection between life and death and rebirth. So I encourage people to develop a plan for their end of life and to set that in writing and to pick at least one person to make sure that those wishes are carried out, and to contact people who are named in the plan ahead of time and to have discussions so there's clear understanding of what is wanted. As somebody is dying, there are end-of-life support processes that I do. I help the person with life review. I have loved ones of the one who is dying typically be around the bedside, whether it's in a home or in a hospital, a hospice, or some other facility. And we openly talk about the life that's been lived, share memories and stories, and we also have a conversation about afterlife. We have that conversation so I get a chance to hear what the viewpoints are of the person who's dying, as well as get some understanding from the loved ones that are part of that process of support as the person makes transition. So there's this preliminary end-of-life closure process that I sometimes get to help with. And then as the person gets very close to death, sometimes I'm called in at this time and that is to do a crossing over ceremony. In the form of the craft that I practice, the circle craft tradition, we work with the 5 elements of nature: earth, air, fire, water, spirit. Earth, connected with the body and the physical realm in human life. Air, the mental realm, the intellect, cognition. Fire, stamina, will, action. Water, emotions, relationships, feelings. Spirit, soul. So as a person is crossing over, either the person who's making that transition asks me or one of their loved ones does, I will be by their side and do a farewell, working with a symbol of each of the elements. So scattering some salt, or sometimes I'll work with some soil from the person's own home, or some other earth symbol, a pinnacle platter, a favorite rock, and touch it to the body and do a blessing of the body and a farewell to the body and the life that's passing. With air, it depends on the location as to how I work with air. Often I'll take a feather or a fan and move so that the person is able to feel the air. If I'm in a place where I can actually kindle incense, some hospitals that's just not an option. Some hospices it is, but often a person may be hooked up to oxygen or whatever, and you can't use light flame or whatever. But if I can use some incense, I will. But often I'll use my hand or a feather to connect with the air and say farewell to the intellect and the light that's passing. If we can use a live flame for fire, we do, or now in this age of battery-operated candles, I will use that, or a wand or a rattle for fire and say farewell to one's will and doing self, and then with water, an anointing with blessed water to say farewell to the emotions and feelings. But for spirit, we don't say farewell to the spirit. Instead, I generally are using a clear quartz crystal, or if the person has a particular spiritual tool very special to them, I'll use that. And there we call on the spirit of the person to guide them in their journey into the other world. Typically, I'll also honor ancestors and call upon them. And if there's a particular form of the divine, goddess and god, or goddess or god, or a whole pantheon, depends on the person, I will call upon the divine as the person knows the divine to aid with the transition. Sometimes people are gathered around the bedside when I'm doing the crossing over, and an old craft tradition, here again, if flames are permitted, is to kindle 2 candles, 2 taper candles, have somebody at the foot of the bed hold one, and at the head of the bed hold one, representing going through the gateways into the other world. After a person dies, it totally depends on what their wishes have been. I may be part of the process of anointing and blessing the body. Sometimes the person has gotten some funeral home professionals to do that work, and sometimes those people do it in connection with me and other people important in the person's life. After the body is taken from the place of death, it generally goes through refrigeration, if there's going to be a full-body green burial, or it's prepared for cremation. Some want a ritual while the cremation process is unfolding, and some funeral homes actually have a cremation facility have the ability to let the loved ones press the button to start the cremation. For full body green burial, the body is typically put in a refrigeration unit. Sometimes it's put in a container with dry ice if one's choosing to do a home funeral and have people that do home funeral work. And then for a ceremony known as a funeral or a memorial, that may take a variety of different forms. Sometimes we do a wake and a visitation, and then have a funeral or memorial, and then do an interment of the ashes for cremation or the body for full body burial. Sometimes those other death passages are combined. And for natural burial, sometimes they want both the funeral and the burial at graveside, and I've had that experience. When we do a natural burial, what makes that different than burial with an embalmed body in a casket put in a grave with a liner, most of the time the grave is open, there's a grave site committal ceremony, but then everybody leaves and the body is not lowered into the ground in the liner and the vault or whatever. Natural burial is quite different. The body is present, and then as part of the gravesite ceremony, the body is let down, usually with some straps or ropes in the body, and whatever the container it's in is set down into the earth. And then those who are present not only have an opportunity to throw some grave goods into the grave, but to actually do the filling in of the grave. Mm. I think one of the most powerful things about natural burial, whether it's cremation interment or a full body burial, is when you have the people that are grieving take part in putting the remains into the ground and then filling the grave in. There is a type of catharsis that happens. It seems to facilitate people's understanding at not only intellectual level, but action level, emotional level, social level, that the shell, the physical body that the loved one had been using in the life now past, is indeed being put away. And the opportunity to be part of that process helps. It isn't so much a closure, but it is a way of turning the page from that chapter of having the loved one incarnate in the body to the next chapter, which is relating to the loved one and the eternal love that goes beyond the grave in a spiritual form. Some people have come to a natural burial at a cemetery and have never been at any burial at all where they actually witnessed a body being put into the ground, much less helped with it. And I will say that over the years, as we've been doing natural burial, I've received much positive feedback from people who came to be a support but actually ended up helping and feeling better as a result. It doesn't change the fact that the loved one has died, but there is some type of real primal experience of doing right by one's loved one's memory and participating in the farewell in a very physical way that seems to be very powerful and therapeutic.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I love the way you give description in detail about this whole process, because it's so in-depth and so spiritual, and most people don't realize how sacred the transition really is from one
I
world to
agree.
the next. Yeah, and it's beautiful. Your representation of this information is just like an elder. I'm so appreciative of you being here. I just wanted you to know on this world and also in this interview. I'm just really, really grateful to you, Selena. Just can't say that enough. But the more I hear what you're saying, the more it just really touches my spirit. So, just had to
and Samhain is a time where we can get up close and real with death, not only honoring the dead, but really taking a look at that part of the circle of life, death, and rebirth. So often, so much emphasis in, especially American pop culture, is on life and living life at the fullness. And I certainly honor the support of youth and youthful energy and rejuvenation, and that's great. But we also need to look at the whole life cycle and recognize that middle age and old age also part of a natural cycle. And when we look at death, rather than relegating that to some scary horror movies, that we can look at death as a kind of birth into another reality. So one of the things that we have been doing with our Green Cemetery project is helping to do end-of-life education, not just green burial, but really making it possible for people to talk about end-of-life choices, to do planning, to take the stigma, the stress, the awkwardness away from that whole piece of the life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's so important to do. And more people need to be educated, regardless of their belief systems. They just need to understand. And while we're on this subject, let's talk a little bit about Samhain. And let's talk about what does Samhain mean to those who are listening and may not understand the terminology, and what does it symbolize insofar as the process of what witches celebrate?
So Samhain comes from a Celtic word. Many say it means summer's end. It's the last of the harvest festivals. And at the beginning of August, late July, early August, was the first of the harvest festivals, Lunasa or Lammas. We call it the Green Spirit Festival. And that's a time for celebrating the beginning of harvest. And for many pagans, when we get to fall equinox time, that's the pagan Thanksgiving. Nature is in great abundance, and crops are coming in from the fields, and apples from the orchards, and nuts are being gathered, and it's just a wonderful, bountiful time. The last of the harvest, up at least in these temperate climate zones where we're living, it's done by the end of October. And Samhain in ancient times was a time from resting from all the harvest activities, back when people had more interaction with agriculture as part of day-to-day life. So much in America today is more urbanized, and those who are doing the food production tend to be in rural areas, farmers, although increasingly people are doing gardens in cities and suburbs and small towns as well as out in the countryside. So Samhain is a harvest festival. It's the end of harvest. It's the Celtic New Year. The Celts began their cycling of day with sundown, and their beginning of the year with going into the darkest time of the year. So the days are definitely getting shorter and shorter and shorter as we move to late October, early November. And New Year traditions from the past continue to be with us today. So one of those traditions is to let go of things that have been problematic in the spiritual New Year time. So as the old year passes away, one takes stock of how one has been in the past year, look at what behavior patterns have been helpful and what have not, make some resolutions to make some change. It's a great time for new beginnings as well as endings. And just as with the calendar New Year at the end of December, beginning of January, people make resolutions there. Witches, Wiccans, Druids, and other pagans will make New Year's resolutions for the spiritual New Year. One may look into the year ahead with some type of divination practice that may take the form of working with runes, tarot cards, I Ching, scrying, dream interpretation, and some other forms. Samhain also is a time connected with death. Literally, death is in the air. Plants are dying back in many places that have the 4 seasons. And it is a time not only for preparing for the coming colder weather and winter time, but it's a time for reflecting on death and rebirth. For that reason, one of the most important traditions connected with Samhain is that of paying respects to loved ones who have died in the past year and to loved ones who are amongst the dead, regardless of how long ago they passed, and ancestors, those you're descended from that you may never have met because it's been generations ago. One good way of celebrating Samhain and honoring the dead is to have an altar and to take pictures and heirlooms, mementos of those who have died that are important to you, and to put them on that altar and to kindle a candle in memory and respect. And some also do what I call the spirit plate tradition, which is on Samhain night, which for many witches is October 31st. Some will celebrate it a little earlier and some a little later, some at the closest full moon and some at the closest dark moon. So there are a number of different traditions, but I'd say most people it's on or near October 31st. So on the Samhain night, or the main night of a Samhain celebration that might go on for several days and nights, one would set a place setting at one's table for the dead and take a bit of each of the bits of food that are being served and place it on the plate. And one would also have a cup at that spirit place setting and take a bit of all the beverages that are being served at that meal and put it in the cup. And to invite the dead to come and be present. In a symbolic sense, in a spiritual sense, to dine with the family, with the household, with the community on Samhain night.
Mm-hmm. It's very beautiful. And do you obviously facilitate a circle cast or a death circle, or incorporate a type of doorway which you invite the ancestors to come through?
Yes, we celebrate Samhain in a variety of different ways over a period of days and nights. So we're in that category of time-release Samhain celebrations. Mm. We have our festival the weekend closest to October 31st, or including October 31st, and we have ceremonies and festivities over a 3-day period. And our main ritual, which is the Saturday night of our Samhain weekend festival, we have a ceremony in which everyone who's taking part has brought mementos of departed loved ones and set them on a grand altar that's sometimes 20 feet in length. It's actually a series of tables around our large temple room, and there are candles, votive candles lit at the different stations with everyone's ancestors and loved ones. And then during the heart of the ceremony, we open a portal to the other world and call forth those who are beloved dead. I generally am the one who facilitates that part, and we call to the dead to come and be with us in a way that's appropriate for the dead and for us. We're not attempting to be mediums and actually be possessed by the dead. Instead, it's like a kind of cell phone connection with a speakerphone to the other world. So we will do chanting, we'll do visualization, we open up the portal, and then during the invocation part, people can call out the name or names of loved ones they wish to connect with and honor. We sometimes will do that part by first calling those who we have known in our families, in our friends, who have died in the past year, then call other loved ones that we've known who have died, and then call the ancestors. Sometimes we also will be honoring people we may not have known that have died in the past year or even beyond that, but who have been influential, that have had an impact on society. So we have a variety of different ways we call to the dead. We have a spirit plate and a spirit cup on one altar set up for that, and then after we have called forth the beloved dead, we have a period of time of meditation in which we pay attention to what messages, impressions come to us. Some people get that visually, some people hear through an inner voice, some messages that way. Some people just get a sense, more clairsentience experience. Once we are done with our communion with our beloved dead, we close the portal and give thanks to the beloved dead. It isn't so much we tell them to go away per se, but we do bring closure to that process, give thanks, and often we'll have some words saying, stay with us if you wish, or depart in peace if you will. And then following our communion with the beloved dead, we typically go outdoors to a gigantic bonfire and then move into a celebratory way of welcoming in the new year. Often we will have cauldrons with tarot cards in them. And every year, sometimes they're oracle cards, sometimes they're tarot cards, and everyone has a chance to draw a card with guidance for the year ahead.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful ritual, yeah. And I love the way you describe this once again, because there are people out there who really misunderstand what the craft is about, what pagans are about, and this kind of clears up, I think, any superstition some might have insofar as what we're about.
Well, that's it. The word witch is really a complicated term.
Mm-hmm.
Some Wiccans are reclaiming that word as wise one, or one that can shape and transform, whether it comes from WIC, which, like wicker basket, or whether it also has its roots, or alternatively has its roots wit, meaning wisdom. There's some debate about the origins of the Wicca word and the witch word, but many people are looking at reclaiming that word as a term that is used for people who are practicing a form of nature religion that honors life, that seeks to not only live in harmony with other humans, but the whole circle of life in the natural world. I think if more people understood that most people that are using the word witch for themselves are coming from that place rather than something from some witch propaganda from the Middle Ages. I mean, there were hundreds of years of bad PR using the witch word.
Right.
And witch got to be used as a term synonymous with spiritually and politically incorrect, and therefore needing to be exterminated. And I'm not making light of a really horrific time in human history, but that's really where the baggage around the witch word got started. Some say that the word witch really is about connecting with the wisdom and ancient ways of nature and should be used in that regard. Others see witch meaning anybody that practices some form of magic. Some people use the word witch meaning some kind of nasty person. There's a lot of different definitions, but the pagans who use the word witch for themselves are really coming from a very positive space. Mm-hmm. Some pagans are choosing not to associate with the word witch because it's so complicated. And in recent decades, with the emergence of witch in pop culture that's gone beyond the Wizard of Oz with Glinda the Good and the Wicked Witch of the West, who had a much bigger part, we now have Harry Potter and a whole variety of other uses of witch in the fantasy and science fiction realm. Some of those depictions are positive. Some of those depictions are negative. So I guess the big question is, if you're using the word witch for someone, which witch is which?
Well said, without a doubt. And insofar as the Samhain ritual goes and honoring the dead, that also includes animals, right?
Yes, we have at our Circle Cemetery places where people are burying their companion creatures, cats, dogs mostly, but there's been goldfish and other creatures that have been important in a family's life. And during our large main Samhain ceremony, we have people honoring their cats and dogs and other creatures who have died in the past year.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
The most recent burial I've done at Circle Cemetery was a cat by the name of Mr. White.
Aww.
And family, it was a cat rescue and from a shelter, and the cat did have some happy times with the family. But the cat, when the cat was adopted, had kitty AIDS and lived only another year and a half after the family got the cat. I guess if anything good can be said is that the cat did die pretty quickly once the immune system collapsed. I mean, it had a very happy life. Mm-hmm. But the family really wanted to not only have the cat buried at a place where they could come back and visit the gravesite, but really wanted to honor the life of that cat. And so in addition to doing burial, I do funeral for creatures.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's awesome. And I was going to ask you about, for an average person who would like to participate in some form of ritual around Samhain, what would they need to do in order to create a sacred space?
I think an easy way to do this would be to pick some deceased relative or ancestor, get a picture or an heirloom, set up a table, put a votive candle there, and set up a chair kindle the candle, and say some words of appreciation to the departed loved one. You don't have to try to communicate. Just the simple act of remembering and honoring is a very powerful way of celebrating Samhain. Mm-hmm. Another thing that one can do at Samhain, if you are able to actually have a flame of some kind, is to kindle a candle to represent the change in spiritual year. That you say farewell to the past and hello to the new year coming, and meditate on a candle flame. That also is a pretty simple ceremony that one can do. In addition to these, one of the things I encourage people to do at Samhain is to do some research about Samhain. Talk with people who celebrate it. Certainly the website is full of information. Not all of it's accurate, but there is quite a bit of information about Samhain traditions and customs from the past and the present, and to do some Samhain education.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
One can do the spirit plate place setting at the family table. If one's living in a household with several others, people can name who they are remembering at the Samhain dinner. And then what do you do with that plate of food and that cup of beverages is at midnight on Samhain night, or some people do it at dawn the next day or some other time in the near future. Go to some natural place and to pour the beverages out at the base of a tree or some other beautiful place, and place the food and let the offerings go back to nature.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Go ahead.
Some people like to visit cemeteries around Samhain. And if you have an ancestor that, or a grandparent or other relative that's been buried in a cemetery not too far from you, one thing that you can do to celebrate Samhain a few days before Samhain is actually go to that cemetery, go to the grave area, take some flowers if you can, or some other natural decorations, clear the grave. You might take a little broom and sweep off the gravestone if there is one, or wash it, tend the grave, and then leave an offering and pay respects to the departed loved one that's there. The act of grave visitation and grave tending is something very ancient. People who are of Mexican ancestry celebrate a Samhain-like festival called Days of the Dead. And there the family will go out to the gravesite of a loved one and actually have a picnic on the gravesite after tending the grave. And that's considered a way of honoring the departed loved one and keeping alive some ancient practices.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to acknowledge those who have transferred out. And I hope more people get in tune with that. It'd be really nice to see. And I know there's a lot of superstition about possessions around the Samhain time of year. And what's your impression of earthbound spirits and or people being, say, possessed, regular people, not obviously people of the craft, but insofar as what does that superstition tell you?
Well, that's a very good question, and there certainly are a lot of different opinions about ghosts and earthbound spirits. I think it's important, if you're going to be working with the dead in a sacred way, to clear the area where you're going to be doing the ceremony first. You may burn some incense such as frankincense, or you may use sage or rosemary, and physically clear the space and then use some type of incense associated with cleansing as well as uplifting an area, and to burn that so that you have a clear spiritual space to do your work. I do think there's value in creating a sacred circle, and this can take the form of physically casting a circle with a wand or a staff, envisioning a circle of light around you prior to doing the work, and then at the end of any ceremony that you do, giving thanksgiving and then doing a clearing as well. The reason I'm suggesting that is that when you are working with the dead, it can be unpredictable. And it's best not to take on too much if you do not have good skills in this. The basic things that I suggested about having a small altar set up for a loved one and paying respects, or having a table place setting set, having a bonfire, or having candle flame, those are safe practices. One certainly can go that extra step and create the sacred circle around you when you do that work. But if you're going to be doing some kind of a ceremony in which there's going to be the calling forth of the dead and a number of people are involved, it's best to do some kind of protective work. And the reason being is that you want to make sure that what you're calling for to have present is truly something that's good for you and good for them. There are some instances where somebody who has died a violent death or some kind of tragic death, there's emotional residue, and that can get stuck to a place. And that's why there are some places that are reported to be hauntings. If one is interested in finding out more about that, it's best to do some studies with somebody who is skilled in working with the other world and doing that kind of cleansing work. If somebody has taken their own life, or they've been murdered, or they've been tortured and then they died, there's trauma connected with that. And sometimes burning sage, for example, or some other basic cleansing operation isn't sufficient to let that residue of a spirit move on to the other world. You may have to use some additional methods. There are certainly a variety of different traditions around exorcism and spirit cleansing. I personally see that, as in all things spiritual, it's important to use your critical thinking in combination with your intuitive sensing. And if you find that something doesn't feel right or is scary, get some support around that and stop doing something if you're involved in a ceremony and something is starting to scare you. It's better to cease and desist rather than to continue on and deny those feelings. Certainly, there's many things having to do with the dead that have yet to be understood and analyzed. I do think that science itself is going to grow and develop some better theoretical models for explaining afterlife phenomena and ghosts and hauntings and things. I don't see them as just figments of somebody's imagination. I certainly have had some instances over time where I have done some cleansing of places where somebody has died in a sad or a horrible way, and have had some success with clearing the space, but I don't see that as something someone should just delve into without a lot of training in grounding, centering, protection, and investigation and analysis.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so what is your impression about people who play around with the Ouija boards on Samhain, or do you think that would be a good call or perhaps not so good of a call if they're not experienced?
I would say it depends. If someone is really grounded and knows how to work with that device in a safe and good way, it could be a powerful means for getting some messages from those who are no longer physically incarnate. I don't think Samhain night is a good time to start experimenting with a Ouija board if one does not know basic protections and hasn't had some skills in making distinction between spiritual influences that are helpful and those that are not. Mm-hmm. You know, one would not go, well, I would hope not, go into some major city down into an area that's crime-ridden, go out there and go, hello, here I am. Well, why should you go into the spirit world on Samhain night and go, hello, here I am? You don't really want to make yourself a target.
Exactly. That's well said. And also, insofar as grounding goes, how would somebody go about grounding for an average person?
Well, being able to understand the power of healing breath is really important. Taking deep, slow breaths to relax oneself and to be centered. The ability to calm oneself is a real basic skill one needs to have in witchcraft work and any kind of work with spirit energies, regardless of what one's religion is. That's part of it. Another part is the sense of being centered. Now, many people will use some means of visualization, whether it's growing, the sense of growing roots, that image from the bottoms of one's feet, from the base of one's spine, and really linking into the earth. That's why it's often called grounding. Or the idea of standing barefoot on soil and grounding that way, holding a stone, a large stone that's an old stone that's solid and comfortable to hold in one's hand, that's been dedicated as a grounding stone. That's another way of doing grounding. Working with salt, rubbing that between one's hands and connecting with that dimension of connecting with the earth. So grounding is essentially anchoring yourself psychologically and spiritually, and centering is connecting with the wisdom or the divine within yourself, or the alignment of the divine that you work with in your own tradition. When you work from that deep space, then you are connecting with guidance that will serve you well as you go about a spiritual operation of some sort, whether it's a ceremony, a meditation. Many people do grounding and centering and don't even realize that's what they're doing. Someone who feels pretty tired and they come back from work and they say, okay, I'm going to jump in the shower and just let the water flow over them. that can be a cleansing and a very centering and grounding experience.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes one will just go and sit at the base of a tree when one's feeling a need to just chill. That can be a really powerful grounding technique as well. Some people will actually stand up to a really large old tree that's in good health and put their backbone right up against the trunk and experience a oneness with the tree and allow that connection with the tree to do a kind of grounding.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful, too. I love the trees. That's great. And can you describe the drawing down to our listeners?
Yes, there are different approaches to drawing down the moon, full moon, within the Wiccan religion. The type of drawing down that I teach and that I practice is a bit different than what many people have, I guess, encountered in the literature. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of drawing down that one does oneself. There's a particular ritual posture. One stands with feet shoulder length apart, knees slightly bent, back pretty straight, facing the full moon, and then taking one's arms and you're becoming a cup. You hold your palms up, facing each other, and your arms up, and then you look at the full moon above you, and you experience yourself taking the radiation, the radiance, the moonlight, the power of the sacred moon, and you draw it down into yourself, and you may use a particular sacred form. For many people, the moon is associated with a goddess. So a full moon goddess name, such as Luna or Selene or Diana, for example, calling on that goddess form to come and be with you and be in you. And as the moon comes, the light comes into yourself, then moving one's hands to one's heart and holding them and in a way drinking in that drawn down spiritual radiance into oneself, going into a meditative state and paying attention to what messages come to you from the sacred moon and or the goddess of the moon, if that's the sacred name that you used, as you do this process. We have a full moon circle that we have every month, and we have a different focus each month depending on the time of year, and we've done a number of different things to connect with the moon. But one of the most popular things from the people that take part is this personalized drawing down. Why draw down the moon using that visual imagery, calling on the moon as a type of divinity that you connect with? It can be good for wisdom and guidance. It can be good for healing, for creativity. It can help rejuvenate. And most of all, it is a practice, when done over time, deepens your ability to align with the sacred.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. Oh, I'd love to attend one of your ceremonies. I'll tell you what, to make it out there sometime, I suppose. And your name in general, I mean, how did you come about that name? Is that your given name?
Well, I took this name back in the mid-1970s when I started writing. So Selena is a name from the ancient Greek for the full moon. And it's a derivation of my first priestess name. When I first started being a priestess of a group, I had a variant of that name. Fox actually is a family name. I'm descended from the Fox family that made their home for many generations in what is now known as Shenandoah National Park. And there's a place at the north end of the park known as Fox Hollow. My Fox ancestors lived on that land, and there's actually the Fox family cemetery with some gravestones still visible that are part of that park. So Fox name I got through family lines. The Selena name I took as I started becoming public with my priestess work, and it's now a part of my legal name, and which I'm most known by. And I really find it's been an amazing journey. I did not start out to be a priestess in this life. I thought that I was going to be a psychologist for a living, and I do clinical psychotherapy and spiritual counseling still as part of my career, but most of my full-time work is really focused on teaching and writing, running Circle Sanctuary, organizing events, and running the cemetery, and a variety of other things. I actually do diversity consultation work for a variety of governmental agencies and other institutions. Part of what I've endeavored to do over the last few decades is to help build bridges of understanding with hospitals, mental health facilities, hospices, prisons, campuses, military installations, and other places about nature religion as a whole, about paganism and its diversity, and the craft in particular.
That's wonderful. I applaud you for the work you're doing. I really do. It's and it has had such an impact in America, especially. So I'm really pleased that you're doing that. And so far as the burial go for military personnel, so the Wiccan craft religion is actually honored in the military burial. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we were part of what I call the Veteran Pinnacle Quest, which was a 10-year-long process and religious freedom battle for equal rights for Wiccans and other pagans who are serving and who have served in the U.S. military. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs works hand in hand with the U.S. Department of Defense, which is the armed forces part of the government. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs supports those who have served not only in life but after death. And there is something called the Memorial Markers Program with the National Cemetery Administration of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. It used to be that if you were part of a religion and there were people connected with that religion who were serving in the U.S. military that wanted to have the religious symbol added to the grave marker after death to mark the grave of the deceased veteran, that you submitted the symbol, the name of the religion, and contact information, and the VA would look at that, pretty much add it to the list, and then you're all set. But in 1997, pagans started asking for the pinnacle to be added to the list. And different groups, different Wiccan groups and other pagans sent in a variety of requests. And the VA, they didn't turn them down, but didn't grant them either. So there was a period of nearly 10 years where the pinnacle requests were there with the VA, but not added to the list. Circle Sanctuary was part of that process, supported the groups that had put in their applications in 97 and 98 and after. By the time 2005 came around, no one had gotten the symbol on the list, and we decided that it was time for us to take direct action instead of just supporting the quest. So we put in our own application. And because I had worked for the federal government in the past and have connections to this day by doing consulting and diversity education work with the federal government, I knew a bit about how to work with the federal government and made sure that I tracked our paperwork. The long story is up at our website. If you go to www.circlesanctuary.org and you go under our work, you'll see something called Military Ministries in the drop-down menu. If you really want the whole story, you can go and read about the Veteran Pinnacle Quest. So 2005 and 2006 and 2007, that was pretty much most of what I did with my life during that time. I not only filed the application on behalf of Circle Sanctuary and the military families connected with us and the veterans, but I did a lot of communication with various government officials, went to Washington, D.C. twice, worked with widows connected with Circle Sanctuary whose husband had a need, deceased husband had a need to have the pinnacle on a stone to mark the gravesite. Probably the most visible of the widows connected with Circle Sanctuary is Roberta Stewart, whose husband, Sergeant Patrick Stewart, was the first Wiccan soldier killed in action in Afghanistan in, ironically, Operation Enduring Freedom. He died in 2005. She finally got to a point in her grieving in 2006 to request a marker for her husband on the Wall of Heroes at the local veteran cemetery in Fernley, Nevada. Went in to fill out the form, and the cemetery director told her, well, she could get a plaque for her husband, but it couldn't have a pinnacle on it. So here is a woman who is already dealing with the loss of her loved one, but now she has the additional grief of not being able to get his and her faith symbol on the marker. She was part of a much larger group of people connected with Circle Sanctuary in Nevada, and talked to some friends, and they let her know that Circle Sanctuary was already working on trying to get the pinnacle approved. And she and I talked, and I gave her support in dealing with her grief around all of this, and then asked her if she was willing to take her story public in order to get this done, and she was. And I really want to honor Roberta Stewart as well as the other widows who were part of Circle Sanctuary's federal lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, brought with the help of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. That eventually won the day. I went to Washington twice, once with Roberta, met with government officials in the executive branch, went to Capitol Hill, met with officials and their staff there, and eventually we had to take it into federal court. And the good news is we were finally able to get a settlement that not only got the markers for Sergeant Patrick Stewart and Jerome Birnbaum, a Korean War veteran who had died, and his widow had wanted a marker with pinnacle for him, but for others that had the need. And so in 2007, after nearly a 10-year battle, the pinnacle was added to the list of the emblems of belief to be included on VA-issued markers, headstones, and other memorial monuments for deceased veterans. There are now more than 110 U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs issued pinnacle grave markers in private and public cemeteries across the U.S. At Circle Cemetery, we have 9 of those pinnacle markers. At Arlington National Cemetery, there are 8. And then other cemeteries, 1, 2, I think some other ones have had 3 or 4. So I'm glad finally that that got done. And while it was the settlement of Circle Sanctuary's lawsuit against the VA that eventually got the VA to put it on the list. It was the combined efforts of pagans of many paths, as well as people of other religions and of no religion whatsoever, that all joined forces with us to make this happen. I'm thankful for the media. I'm thankful for all the people up on Capitol Hill and people in the executive branch that were supportive. I'm very thankful for our attorneys and all the other legal organizations that helped. It's an example of how, despite the diversity within paganism and the craft, if we can find common cause and find ways to work together, then we can achieve equality that we deserve in society.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's wonderful. It's incredible. I'm so pleased to know that. Yeah, this is perfect.
And I think Samhain is a really powerful time to do workings for pagan rites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not only is that word witch in all of its complexity out in pop culture all over the place at this time of year. So we have the storybook witch, and we have, for real, Wiccan and pagan witch practitioners. But we also have the memories of people who were killed because they were called witches, whether they really were witches or not. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's a teaching moment at Samhain every year as we look back over human history and look ahead for what can be possible, that we find better ways of humankind dealing with diversity, that we find ways to stop hate crimes, not only against pagans, but against people of many races and ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender, all the diversity. We really need, as a human species, to find better ways to be together and to celebrate the diversity rather than try to eradicate some of it or all of it. And I think having some type of working, personal, small group, large community in which we call for equality for our people, liberty and justice for our people and for all, can be a really powerful thing to add to our personal practice and our group ceremonies. We work with Lady Liberty in a lot of our pagan rites work. Why Lady Liberty? Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, that has become an icon for the United States of America and its freedoms, actually has its roots, the imagery and the name Liberty itself, in pagan Rome. Mm-hmm. A form of the divine, a goddess known as Libertas, was honored in pagan Rome for hundreds of years. And when America became a nation, many of the founders worked with Libertas imagery as a way to symbolize and to energize the quest for American freedom and independence. And I think it's really amazing to see this ancient Roman pagan goddess, Libertas, grow and develop sacred force around the planet, where her image is appearing in different ways in different countries. People, even back in 1989, 1990 in Tiananmen Square in China, when there was a student uprising at that time, one of the symbols they used as they were questing for democracy in China was what they called the goddess of democracy, which was modeled on Libertas. And I think we who practice the craft and other forms of paganism that are Americans really can take some time out at Samhain, as well as the rest of the year, and take a look at some of the images that are in common use as so-called secular symbols in American culture. Mm-hmm. Liberty is one of them. Justice is another one. And Ceres, a goddess known as Demeter amongst the ancient Greeks, a goddess of prosperity, also appears in public art. We can reclaim our pagan imagery. We can work with that imagery in the sacred forces that gave birth to this imagery in our workings for specific pagan rights issues and for human rights issues as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I totally agree. Yeah, there's so many key signatures of esoteric teachings throughout the United States, and of course some people consider them to be very superstitious once again. I mean, that's misdirected on some level, but yeah, I totally agree with you.
I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and one of the things I like about Washington, D.C. as a city mm-hmm. is the pagan architecture.
Right.
You have an obelisk from ancient Egypt called the Washington Monument.
Yep.
You have the Jefferson Memorial, which is based on the Pantheon, the home of all the gods in ancient Rome. Mm-hmm. You have the Lincoln Memorial, which takes the form of an ancient Greek temple.
Yep.
And you have the U.S. Capitol, which has at its top the goddess of freedom, which is a blend of libertas, the classical robes, and a Native American goddess form with her headdress. Mm-hmm. Those are just some of the symbols. If you get to the Library of Congress, those of you who are listening that have an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., be sure you go into the main Library of Congress building. You'll see it as a temple of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. It's a huge mosaic in one of the halls, and even the National Cathedral, which has its roots in the Anglican, the Episcopalian tradition, has green men and green women and other imagery woven into the cathedral, just as was the case in some of the old cathedrals of old Europe. And what are green men and green women and the green ones but a personification of nature rejuvenating?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And what is your impression of the Masonic symbolism? Also, I know that there's kind of a blend. Would you say that's connected to paganism?
That's a good question. I have to disclose that I'm descended from people who are Scottish Rite Masons, so I'm not unbiased in giving this answer.
It's funny because I am too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have looked at my Masonic roots, and I do hope that eventually that Masonic lodges in America will admit women, and there are some co-masonry forms that do have men and women. There's some French Mason forms that do have men and women. But right now, we're dealing with several hundred years of Scottish Rite Masonry being for men, a men's club. So I would be a Mason right now if I was the right gender, but I'm not. But that doesn't stop me from being able to explore Masonry and Masonic roots. I see that Masonry is really drawing from some universal principles that go across different faith traditions and cultures. And I really honor that about the Masonic practice. I also celebrate that Masonic practice does make use of some ancient pagan symbols of illumination, the eye in the triangle, pyramids, sun disk, different configurations of pointed stars, 5-pointed stars, 6-pointed stars, 7-pointed stars, etc. There's a real focus on light and illumination. There's a focus on principles of honesty, truth, service, humility, charity. There's much about Masonry that I see is really wonderful, not only for those who belong to Masonic lodges and some of the adjunct organizations such as Eastern Star for women. There are many wonderful things about Masonic practice, and I do see that Masonic practice is carrying forth some of the old wisdom traditions from the ancient past. To me, it's less important whether this really does go back to Hermes Trismegistus and his emerald tablets from ancient Egypt and other forms of the Hermetic past, or whether this really originated in the 1700s, as some people prefer to give as the origins of contemporary Masonic rites. I really see that there is woven into Masonic practice and philosophy and teachings some really positive values. And regardless of whether one supports the Masons and their particular forms of ceremonial life or not, I do think common ground is the fact that Masonic charities have done so much for so many people, not only in the United States, but other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I know there's a lot of people that, are very superstitious of Masons, and they think there's a real Illuminati, what they call the Illuminati, which I don't feel is, the Illuminati is not a negative term in my experience with that name, but it's interesting. What is your perception about that when people, try to, correlate the Masonic symbolism with something negative? What do you say to that?
I do think some people have some very distorted views of reality and find it disappointing that misinformation is continuing to be put out as fact that's really distorted opinion. Certainly, I celebrate free speech in America, but some of the same voices that attack Scottish Rite Masons, Knights Templar Masons, and York Masons are also attacking paganism.
Right.
And often the people that are putting out the misinformation are purporting to be Christian. As somebody who was raised Christian, that studied the Bible first 17 years of one's life, having very strong Christian upbringing, and continues to have good relations with a variety of different people into Christianity, my understanding of the central message in Christianity is love. Love and truth and service. Honoring the sacred, doing unto others as you'd like them to do unto you. To me, that's the core of what Christianity is about. It is not bearing false witness against thy neighbor because you have some skewed information. It's not saying that certain people need to be exterminated or that we're anathema. It's not creating hate and fear and strife in society. And I really hope that those people who continue to attack Masons and pagans and other people of faith that really are connected with love and truth and service, I really hope that Christian love that they're purporting to be connected with will illuminate their hearts and get them in a space where they truly have understanding. Many of the people over time that have attacked pagan ways and attacked other esoteric ways are really coming from a fear-driven space and are actually, in many ways, the so-called devil that they are claiming that they're against. They wrap so much of their attention, their ideology, their focus on battling the so-called Satan that they don't realize that they have become liars, bullies, and haters, and that they're actually being the opposite of what Jesus was about.
Well said. Very true. And Selena, I just want to let you know we're getting ready to wrap this up here. We've got a few more minutes left. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for your presence this evening. You're a blessing to this world and to all of us, pagans, witches, those of us in the craft, and all forms and designs across the world. And I want to thank you for what you do and what you represent on this world. You've really just moved my spirit tonight, and I just want you to know that. And I wish you a blessed Samhain, and of course, and I'd love to have you back to further discuss more topics on paganism and witchcraft and all the above and below.
Well, I am very glad to connect with you and all your listeners that are listening live and that will be listening later. If folks want to connect with me, you can write me, circle@circlesanctuary.org, or you can connect with me on Facebook, Selena Fox Updates. That's my main page, and I post all sorts of pictures and links and information there. I also have a website, SelenaFox.com, and it's a pleasure to be able to connect with you and to celebrate Samhain.
Yay.
So regardless of what one's own spiritual or philosophical path is, may you be blessed as we go into this next part of life's journey. We want to honor the ancestors, the ancient ones. The divine is one, the divine is many, goddesses and gods, and the spirit of love and cooperation and of peace. And as we go into this new year, may there be more peace, more understanding, more love, more freedom, equality, justice, and happiness for all.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, and thank you, Mad Painter, a.k.a. Thomas Becker, for being my wonderful producer tonight. All right, everybody, see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.